Discovering Alabama is a production of the Alabama Museum of Natural History.
Alabama the beautiful. Alabama, the state of surprises. Alabama, the land of forests. The great majority of the Alabama landscape is forest land, an expanse of woodlands that help make Alabama increasingly special in an age when many regions have lost their native landscapes to sprawling cityscapes. Life in Alabama is still blessed with abundant forests. Hi, I'm Doug Phillips. You know, some folks say I'm just up a tree with my zeal for Alabama's outdoors. Well, here's proof. They're right. Today, I really am. So I might as well go out on a limb a bit and take a stand about how I feel for these fellas, the trees. Trees are among the most enriching features of our state. They give us a wealth of material items, provide a host of environmental benefits, and they nurture the human spirit with their beauty, their wonder. So join me on this autumn day as we spend a little time visiting with individual members of Alabama's diverse forest realm. This program is about a land unknown to many people. A land that in many ways has escaped the hustle and bustle of modern civilization. A place of bountiful backcountry, forests, streams, and wildlife more diverse than can be found in much of the inhabited world. Come along with me as we explore the natural wonders of this land. Come along as we discover Alabama. Welcome to Discovering Alabama. In this show, we're simply going to take a comfortable stroll in the forest to meet a few friends. Now, you may recall that Alabama's official state slogan used to be Alabama the Beautiful. Then, a while back, the slogan was changed to Alabama the State of Surprises. Well, whichever slogan you prefer, either way, it's our forests that are a major attraction. Not only do visitors to the state proclaim our lush woodlands especially beautiful, but often they find that the abundance of our forest is their biggest surprise. Of course, most Alabamians are proud of the state's treasured forest resources. And in appreciating the appeal of our forest lands, we should also take care to make sure we appreciate the individual members of this arboreal realm, to make sure we don't fail to see the trees for the forests. While we're out here today getting immersed in the woods, we're not going to get immersed in the technicalities. We could get tediously technical just classifying tree leaves. But you know, there's an old saying sometimes used in connection with learning the trees. That saying is, when you label it, you forget it. In other words, sometimes it's best to begin by sensing the remarkable characteristics of the trees. The textures, the smells, the shapes, the colors. As we walk in the woods, it becomes apparent that there are two great races of trees that are distinctively different from each other. One group we call the hardwoods, the other, the evergreens. Let me introduce you to an evergreen friend of mine. And I want you to meet this guy first because it's a good example of Alabama's official state tree. This is the longleaf pine. And how do we get acquainted with the longleaf? One way, let's look at the needles. They are long, up to 18 inches in length, thus the tree's name. And the cones are large too. Longleaf pine forests were once dominant across the southern portions of Alabama. One reason the longleaf was selected as the official state tree is the historical role it played supplying quality timber during the development of Alabama and the nation. The longleaf is different from other pines, like, for example, the shortleaf pine, which, as you can see, has short needles, only about 2 to 3 inches in length, and much smaller cones. Of course, as you may know, in many parts of Alabama we find this guy, the loblolly pine, which has needles and cones that are medium-sized compared to the shortleaf and the longleaf. There are about half a dozen species of common pines in Alabama. They're a member of that group we call the softwoods or conifers for obvious reasons. Alabama pines are enjoyed by many kinds of wildlife, some for nesting, some for food, but then there are other enjoyments as well. Now, if I want to make myself some homemade holiday decorations, I'll just add some feathers here and I've got myself a big old gobbler turkey. Maybe it's the striking array of autumn colors, or maybe it's the great variety of species in forest habitats. But for many people, the hardwoods are of greatest interest. So let's go meet a few of our hardwood neighbors. Alabama's hardwood trees are predominantly broadleaf, deciduous trees that are fruit or nut-bearing species. Here's a popular hardwood species, and before I name it, let's take a look at it. How would you describe that? Whitish gray looking, kind of papery flake bark, and the leaf. This is it, rounded lobes, no points on the end, which makes it a little different from the tree right down here. This one is dark colored, heavier barked, and the leaf from it, look at this, it has pointed lobes, pointed little hairs at the end. This is an obvious way to tell the difference between that one, which is the white oak, and this one, which is the red oak. Now, there are probably about 50 to 60 species of oaks in Alabama woods. And among interesting things such as this, the oaks is frequently where you find the little galls. These are insect galls, if you've ever wondered what they are. And inside is a certain time of year a wasp-like insect nest. But more defining of our oaks are the nut, the fruit that it produces, the acorns. And an interesting thing in comparing the white oak with the red oak is the white oak is the better tasting acorn, because the red oak acorn has more tannin in it. Among the many species of oaks in Alabama are some interesting species like the post oak, whose wood is so durably tough it was often used in earlier periods for fence posts. And of course the very common water oak, which sheds its leaves on a different cycle than others and therefore is often found green and leafy in the winter. Down in this hollow, here is a classic, a great big hickory. It's hard to find hickory trees this big anymore. You can tell the hickory by kind of a heavy character, gnarly type branches, and another way to identify the hickory, well, it turns bright gold, yellow in the autumn, and the leaves are symmetrical. There's one on the end and then pairs of two symmetrically right up down the branch. And you probably identified this thing with the hickory, of course, the hickory nut. If you've ever tried to dine on one of these, you know that you usually need a hammer to bust them open. The squirrels don't have any trouble though, it seems. They go to town on them. There are 15, 16 species of hickory in Alabama. Mocker nuts, bitter nuts, two of the common ones that you've probably heard of. Mocker nuts on high ground, bitter nuts typically in the bottomlands. Right over here is an interesting tree from early settler days. And here's a good way to tell it. Look at the leaves. Look at the lobes of the leaves. Here's a leaf with one lobe. Here's a leaf with two lobes. And here's a leaf with three lobes. Not many trees that have those three different shaped leaves on it. That's the first clue that this is the old sassafras. There's several around here. The small one, let me pull it up here if I can. because this is the part that you make sassafras tea from. It's not the leaves, it's the root. And you skin off the outer part or take your knife and chop it up and boil it in the water for a while, and then you've got sassafras tea. Smell. The sassafras is a lot like several other trees in that it doesn't typically reach great size. It's sort of like this one here, for example. This is the dogwood. It too displays brilliant autumn colors, though it's most often known for its springtime bloom. The dogwood, like the sassafras, doesn't get very big. In fact, more often it resembles something of just a big bush in the woods. So maybe the pertinent question for us today is, what is a tree? How do you define a tree? What distinguishes trees from other plants? This is something of a subjective matter, but experts agree there are some distinguishing characteristics. Here's another dogwood we can discuss this at. A tree is a woody, bark-covered plant that's persistent throughout the year. In other words, the stem or trunk doesn't die back as softer tissue plants do in the autumn or winter. Trees attain a trunk size of at least 3 inches at diameter breast height, DBH. That's about 4.5 feet off the ground. That's how foresters measure them. And trees attain a height of, at least 12 to 14 feet. And don't ask me how the experts reached that figure. Finally, trees develop distinctive crowns for each species. Now, we all know that trees are a valuable economic resource for Alabama. But today we're dealing more with the value of trees as living wonders. There may be some values that we adults forget, such as the fact that trees are fun to play in. But there are other ways that trees enrich our lives that we may not always think about. For example, trees are a form of living history.
One of the programs I'm particularly fond of is the Famous and Historic Tree Program in Alabama. It is designed to honor and recognize trees that have played an important role in the history of Alabama or America. They have to be at least 50 years old, in good physical condition, and they have to be approved by a committee. The reason I like it so much is because it recognizes trees as a living history, and that's significant. Some trees are preserved and honored and recognized just for their historical significance in Alabama.
Many of Alabama's trees not only provide a special living link with history, but also rank among the oldest and largest on record, qualifying them for the honorary title of Champion Tree.
The Champion Tree program started in 1970 when 28 trees were listed as champions, and really all it is a non-binding program where we recognize the largest trees of that particular species in the state. At present, there's 196 champion trees in Alabama. And it was started in conjunction with the American Forestry Association, which is a national program. There are several national and co-national champions in Alabama, not to mention just the state champion.
Trees not only link us with our past, they also, in many ways, link us to our future. Autumn leaves, for example, fall to the earth, enrich the soil, and help make possible future life. Okay, what about some trees that we hear about quite a bit, so they must be common, but maybe we don't know exactly what they look like? Well, let's take a look at this one. And let's look at the leaf. This is a clue. What flower is this leaf shaped like? Another clue is the flower is commonly associated with Holland. Right, a tulip. And that's your clue that this is a tulip poplar. Actually, it's not in the poplar family, and the correct name is tulip tree, but in Alabama we call it the tulip poplar, or more often the yellow poplar. In the springtime it puts on a yellow flower that's shaped somewhat like a tulip as well. The inner bark of this tree has been used for medicine. You skim it down and boil it up like so many medicines are made with the wiles of the woods, and it'll cure anything that ails you. The tulip tree is among the fastest growing and tallest of the eastern hardwoods, sometimes reaching heights of more than 100 feet. The tulip tree and another fast-growing hardwood, the sycamore, are also among the largest trees in the southern woods, with trunk size occasionally exceeding 10 feet in diameter. Here's a tree that's often confused with another tree. Let's take a look at it. It has little corky flanges on the branch. In fact, feel that. Put your thumb in there and feel it. It's really corky, spongy feel. And the leaf, that's a good indication of what this tree is. What fish in the sea does this leaf shape remind you of? Starfish, right. And that's your clue that it's not this tree that it's often confused with right here. I'll get the leaf off of it. Now these are both reminiscent of maple shapes, right? But this one is the one that's shaped like the starfish, and this one is less starfish shape, and that's why it's the red maple. And the red on the stem is a good indication there. So we have a sweet gum and a red maple. And the sweet gum is the one that some people consider a nuisance tree because it makes the prickly balls on it, and so sometimes people cut it down. Both, though, are fast-growing and very good shade trees. In addition to being useful shade trees, the sweet gum and the red maple are especially colorful in autumn. But among the first trees to drape themselves in fall color are the black gum, turning brilliant red, and the sourwood, which can be bright red and sometimes yellow. And this is a very good clue to this tree. You want to taste? Woo. Sour. This is the sourwood tree. Now, let's look at the bark. It's deeply furrowed and kind of a rough-looking shape. And the sour tree is easily distinguished in the woods because it usually grows something at an angle, like this one here. But it's also a popular tree for bees. That's where you get the name sourwood honey. Here's another case where confusion might be possible. You see the trunk of this tree? Looks a lot like the sourwood, deeply furrowed, dark, but here's your clue that it's not a sourwood. Here are the leaves that look a lot like the chestnut tree. There used to be a lot of American chestnut across the woods, but they were wiped out by blight many years ago. But that's your clue that this is the chestnut oak. And it's a member of the white oak family and puts out one of the bigger acorns. This one is kind of small, and they get 3 or 4 times this size. And like the other oaks, are a favorite among wildlife. On the North American continent, there are more than 700 species of trees. Alabama is home to about 1/3 of this number. With the Appalachian region of the state dominated by hardwood forests, the coastal plain region more suitable for pine dominance, and the southerly reaches of Alabama's many rivers providing habitat for such wetland species as the bald cypress, which is among the longest living trees in the state, reaching more than 800 years in age. Taken together, Alabama's many different forest communities are among the most diverse in the nation. And here down in the creek bottoms, there leaning out over the creek is a tree commonly found down in the bottomlands. That's a beech tree. Here's another one over here a little more up on the bank. See this smooth bark on the beech tree? That's what makes it so inviting, I guess, to people with their carving knife. Because when you find a big beech way back in the woods, frequently this is the one that's going to have somebody's initials or a date or something carved in it. But sometimes that's interesting information. The thing I like best about the beech is this is a tasty nut, probably the tastiest hardwood nut in the woods. And while we're in this little scope of hardwoods, here are a couple of evergreen trees that grow well in all kinds of settings, including hardwood settings. That's probably all the information you need to know that this is the holly tree, the American holly, and we're in luck today. This one is bearing fruit, the berries. Hollies are like some other trees. In order to bear fruit, the male and the female of the species have to both be in the same vicinity. That's why you'll see some holly trees that don't have berries, because the male and female aren't near each other. And here is another evergreen, not too far from our little scope of woods, hardwoods. This one is the eastern red cedar, and the cedar tree had special connotations of spiritual qualities for the Indians. And you know, maybe they were onto something, because this is not a true cedar. It's in the juniper family, and juniper berries are sometimes used in making gin. What is the most noticeable thing about this cluster of trees? Right, it is laden with dead branches, halfway, sometimes 2/3 up the trunk. And that's one good clue of what this tree is. The leaf is another, kind of a broad flange-shaped leaf. Some folks have compared to a club on a playing card. That's another clue, because this is the blackjack oak. And an interesting thing about it, all of these dead limbs are excellent firewood. The old-timers, Indians, others would collect firewood sometimes from the blackjack oak. Because when you're in the woods, really the best place to find firewood is not on the ground, where it may be moist or rotten, but where you can find up on the trunk dry dead limbs. Well, first thing you notice about this tree is it's got some pretty big leaves on it, huh? And this is the one that you may have heard called a cowcumber tree. It's actually a wild magnolia, and this is a good clue. This one here is the big leaf magnolia. There's several species of wild magnolia, but this one's the big leaf magnolia. They get substantially bigger than this. The Indians used to roll them, dip water out of the stream with. But you may have seen these, and now you know what they are. Okay, for those folks who think maybe I am just up a tree because I love trees so much, if they can't comprehend my hug-a-tree sentiments, well, you know, they could pack it off to one of those basically treeless mega urban centers. You know, one of those world-class cities of progress, and spend a little time living far away from true woods. And if it turns out that they find that asphalt world more appealing than this forested realm, then maybe they ought to just stay put. But if they get the urge for something more real, then we'll talk. Well, today we've only had time to just meet a sampling of our friends in the forest. And if you'd like to get better acquainted with Alabama trees, or with trees, period, for that matter, a good way to do so is to get yourself a field guide to the trees. There are several varieties available. Golden Field Guide, Audubon Field Guide to Trees. These are books you can find in just about any bookstore. And they'll help you get better familiar with the amazing wonder of the trees in Alabama's forests. A treeless world would be a sad situation, a lot like a world without children. In fact, trees are a bit like children. They can go on to live longer than us, and they can give us a lot of joy.
This program is supported by grants from the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, State Lands Division, the Alabama Wildlife Federation, working for wildlife since 1935, and Legacy, Partners in Environmental Education.